Hi, I'm Cooper Giles.
I'm Garrett Olson.
This is our Stat 220 group project. Today we're going to be analyzing the election data set. Now the election data set is a very big data set, looking at different data collected from each individual county and each individual state, as well as Puerto Rico. That data includes political affiliation, education levels, birth and death rates, unemployment rates, and a lot more individual data collection based on each individual county. We decided to trim this data set up just a little bit and Garrett will explain that to you just now.
Yeah, so like Cooper said, it's a massive data set, and so we're working in RStudio to manipulate this, and so we had to load in some necessary packages or tools, you could say, and this data set. And we decided that we only wanted to look at the 12 Midwestern states and assess trends there. And so by definition, those 12 states are Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Minnesota. And then there's also some data entries for states as a whole, which we removed because we're looking at a per county basis. Like I said, there's a massive quantity amount of variables, so we trimmed them down to ones that are just of interest of us, and then we are going to, from those variables, formulate a research question and then assess the trends between those variables. So the ones that we trimmed them down to included the political affiliations, education levels, which are less than a high school degree, have a high school degree, or have a bachelor's degree or higher, population counts, and unemployment rates. After we did all this, we renamed and resaved the CSV file containing all the data and made new data sets to make them easier to manipulate and everything. And then we came up with our research question, which is, does the percent level of education of a county of a Midwestern state serve as a good predictor of that county's majority percent of political affiliation to vote? And so now we're going to head into some of our methods of analyzing this, and Cooper will start off with graphing.
Yeah, so we're going to start off with a scatter plot, including a line of best fit. We have 4 scatter plots for you today. This line of best fit is going to be really important to our graph because it sums up this giant mass of data to show an overall trend that we can draw from this data. So starting with this first one on the y-axis, our variable is the percent of Democratic voters in an individual county, and on the x-axis, the percent of adults with less than a high school degree in individual counties. So overall, looking at this graph, if you looked at these individual data points themselves, which are individual counties, it'd be very hard to draw a conclusion from, which is why we added this line of fit. But if you focus on this line of fit, you see a downward trend overall, showing that when you get to higher percentages of adults with less than a high school diploma, then you tend to have a higher percentage of Republican voters in those same counties, overall showing that downward trend. We're going to move into this next scatter plot, again with a line of fit. This time we replaced the x-axis variable with the percentage of adults with a bachelor's degree or higher, and you can see that trend start to go upwards instead of downwards. This makes sense. That first trend showed us that when the percentage of people with less than a high school diploma increased, then the percentage of Democratic voters decreased. Now that we're talking about a bachelor's degree or higher, in other words, a higher education level, as you see, when you get farther right on the graph, in other words, having a higher percentage of adults with a bachelor's degree or higher, you now have a higher percentage of Democratic voters in those same counties. And if you look at the big mass of data, you can actually kind of draw that conclusion. You have a big grouping down here, and as you go farther right on the graph, you see those individual data points start to move up on the graph, signifying a higher percentage of Democratic voters in those individual counties. We're now going to switch our y-axis and look at the other party in our political environment. So we replace the y-axis with the percentage of GOP or Republican voters in each individual county, and our x-axis is back to the percentage of adults with less than a high school diploma. If you remember from our very first scatter plot, we had a downward trend on our line of fit, and as you can see, now that we replace this y-axis with the percentage of adults voting GOP, you see that downward trend turn into an upward trend. Again, this makes sense. As you go farther right on the graph where you have a higher percentage of adults with less than a high school diploma, you tend to see a higher percentage of Republican voters in those same counties. But I want to focus in again on this line of fit. As you can see, this massive data set is really hard to draw a conclusion from, but that line of fit allows us to see the overall trend on this individual data set. One last scatter plot again with a line of fit. The x-axis is back to the percentage of adults with a bachelor's degree or higher. If you remember from the second scatter plot we showed you that had the same x-axis but the percent Democrat, it was an upward trend with our line of fit. Once again, that's reversed as we switch political parties, signifying that as you get to counties with a higher percentage of adults that hold a bachelor's degree or higher, you have a lower percentage of Republican voters in those counties. And if you scroll that, we'll scroll down just a little bit and look at the overall conclusions we can draw from just this first data type. First, as the percentage of Democrats in a county increases, or I guess as the percentage of people without a high school diploma increases, you see the percentage of adults in that same county voting Democrat decrease, vice versa for the Republican Party. And as the percentage of adults with a bachelor's degree or higher increases, you tend to see a higher percentage of Democratic voters in those counties, and in the same breath, a lower percentage of people voting Republican. Once again, it's really important that we included that line of fit, because for a majority of those scatter plots, it's really hard to see that overall trend. We identified one of the scatter plots that kind of showed that trend, but we made sure to add that line of fit so we could draw that trend, and so we could focus on the trend line on all 4 of our scatter plots.
And like you said, those are kind of hard to interpret without that line of fit, so we wanted to head into some different ways to analyze this data to see if it matched the kind of conclusions we drew from this first section. So now we're going to move into box plots. And right now, we have on the x-axis each of these 12 Midwestern states, and on the y-axis I have the education level of percent of adults with less than a high school degree. And so right now, this is showing, which states on a per county basis have the highest median level percent of people without a high school degree. So as you can see, sadly, Missouri has the top median line. And keep in mind that these dots, you see these outliers are individual counties. But still Missouri has the highest median. And then I'll move into states and the percentage of counties with just a high school diploma. As you can see, those are much higher. You can see kind of which states are where on that. And then lastly, we'll move into states and the percentage with a bachelor's degree or higher. It makes sense that Missouri is right around the bottom right there because it had one of the highest percentage levels per county with less than a high school degree. And then things to note right now are that Wisconsin is one of the highest for percent counties with a bachelor's degree or higher. And so now we're going to compare this to the states and the per county percentage of political party affiliation voting. So right now we have our states here back out on the x-axis, and on the y-axis we have the percent of Democrats. So right now you see that Wisconsin is in the lead with the highest on average median of counties with the percent of voting Democrats, and then places like Missouri are the lowest. And now we'll bounce to an opposite box plot showing the states and the Republicans. As you can see, it's kind of flip-flopped, which makes sense. And these are all higher on the Republicans, which makes sense in these Midwestern states. And then you can see that Missouri and Nebraska have some of the highest with percent voting Republican. And so what we need to combine these two different kinds of box plots to look at is Missouri had the highest median county level percentage of people with less than a high school degree, and it also has one of the highest median county level percentages of voting Republican. And then on the other hand, Wisconsin had one of the highest median county level percentages of having a bachelor's degree or higher, and then it also had one of the highest median county level percentages of voting Democrat. And lastly, for our testing, we're going to move into random forest testing. What this does basically is tell you how important some variables are to a certain variable. And we had to do some data cleaning to get here, and throughout this project we're focusing on the 2016 election. And so right now we have on this little dot plot type of thing, we are looking at less than a high school degree and then what variables are important to it. And we also included unemployment rate as just kind of a thing to monitor it off of, which is very important. And then you see Right at second and third, we have our political party percentages, which makes sense with the rest of the graph, just proving that they are important when determining each other. And then we also have the states listed, which if you look at these and then go back, look at our box plots, it does make sense in this order. And then we'll move into have a high school degree. We see our top three again. These even flip-flop with it saying unemployment is now second in importance, but each time you run this, you might get a different outcome. And then we have our states listed, and then you see just about the same thing. We're having a bachelor's degree, our top three are the same, and we move into our states. And so I'll hand it off to Cooper for some kind of a final conclusion.
Yep, so after looking at our scatter plots with the line of best fit, looking at those box plots in the random forest testing that Garrett all showed us, we feel comfortable saying that there is a correlation between the percentage of education level in each individual county and the percentage of voters for either the Democrat or the Republican Party. That correlation being that as the percent education level is higher in a county, you tend to have a higher percentage of Democratic voters in that same county. And with a lower percentage of education per adult in a county, you tend to have a higher percentage of Republican voters in those counties. Obviously, both of those work vice versa, but overall, we feel safe to say that there is a correlation after looking at the trends we saw from all of our different data sets, from all our models, from all our prediction models, and our tests showing the importance of each individual variable.
Yep. And just to sum it up, just to remind you, this was based off 2016 election data and off these 12 Midwestern states. Thanks.
You.